The word to Jane.
Okay, thanks very much, Corinne. My name is Jane Summerton. I'm a professor emerita in technology and social change, and I'm the scientific advisor for VREF and also the coordinator for the Mobility and Access in African Cities program, known as the MAC program. I'm standing in here today for VRF's director, Henrik Normark, who sends his regrets, but his best wishes to everyone here. I'm really happy to be here. For those of you who aren't familiar with VREF, I can say that we are a nonprofit independent organization, a collection of foundations, which by law is not to, even though we have funding from Volvo, we are not allowed to do anything that benefits Volvo or Volvo interests. So just to be clear on that point, our mission is to support university-based research and education to strengthen sustainability and equity related to today's session in urban mobility and access. And a really important part of our program is our Next Generation Scholars Program. And it is our pleasure today to sponsor this forum to present the work of new scholars in our field. We have a next generation leadership team of facilitators, 2 people from each of our 3 programs. The 3 programs, again, are Mobility and Access in African Cities, the MAP program. We have an Informal and Shared Mobility program, and we have a walking program. And the facilitators here, I will ask them to present themselves in the chat. You are free to contact them to get in touch about our activities, specifically for NextGen Scholars. We do offer quite a lot of opportunities, platforms, seminars, short courses for increasing capacity and helping NextGen Scholars to, for example, navigate the publication process, carry through to the degree, communicate the work, all kinds of things. So if you want to be part of that, just contact one of our facilitators and get into our various lists and opportunities there. So today's forum looks very exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'd like to thank in advance all the presenters and the commentators for your engagement and for being so reliable in being here. It's always a relaxing moment for us here at VRF when we realize we're about to start and everyone's here. So we really appreciate that. And I'd also like to thank the work of the NextGen team in getting all of this in place. So many thanks for that. And I'll turn it over to, I guess it's Obed and Maria José, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks so much, Jen, for that introduction. And thanks everyone for joining us today. You're so much welcome to today's session. I just want to, before I pass it on to Maria, who will introduce and welcome our first presenter, just to let us know that we have 3 presentations in the lineup and quite interesting, as Jen has said. The main theme today is, urban mobility, inequalities, which spans time, gender, and access. And I think just to give an opportunity for colleagues to maybe wave their hands to the rest of the team who are new to ask and see them. Shahan, there is Nisha, there is Kwame, and then Maria José, and myself, yeah. So I'll just give it to Maria, who will just welcome our first presenter, and then the program will continue unannounced. Thank you very much. Maria?
Thanks, Obed. Welcome, everyone. We're very happy to have this research forum focusing on urban mobility inequalities, looking into time, gender, and access in the Global South. And we'll do that by having 3 presenters and 3 discussants. I wanted to start by thanking all of the other applicants that share their abstracts and their will to be discussants. It's really enriching to read the interest on these topics of inequality, accessibility, walking, and unfortunately we don't have the time to have them all presenting and inviting everyone for discussions, but we definitely are doing more research forums this year that enable you to be part actively of the presentations and these peer-to-peer conversations, plus some seniors that also join the research forum. So We have Junievin Ramillano from the University of the Philippines that will tell us something about his ongoing PhD research on public transport service quality attributes. Then we'll go on with Noor Gazarin, who's an independent researcher who is telling us about her research on everyday practices involved in negotiating informal transport, specifically from a gender perspective. And as our third discussant, we have Mobility and Access in Nairobi from the lens of the 15-minute cities by John Awamba, who is based on the University of Pavia in Trieste. So I will let the specificities of each presenter to themselves, like maybe a brief introduction to who you are in terms of research, but kind of thinking of the most important part is to present your research. So we have these 15 minutes and then 5 for discussion. And if there's questions, comments, suggestions, and so on, please use the chat so that we can keep track of it and then go on into a more open plenary. So Obed, I don't know if we should just kickstart with Junievin Ramillano presentation all along. We can, again, as Obed said, we'll just shake our hands either over and I or any of the other facilitators so that you know when you have just 5 minutes left of your 15 minutes. Great, so Junievin, if you wanna share your slides and we can start and kick off. Amazing. We can see you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Again, hi, everyone. First, I would like to thank the Volvo Research and Educational Foundations, the VREF NextGen Scholars Community, and the organizers of this research forum for the opportunity to present my ongoing work. It is a privilege to participate in a forum and centered on the missing mile, informality, access, and urban mobility finance, because the study I will present today focuses on a dimension of mobility that often remains invisible in transport planning discussions, which is the time. My name is Junievin Ramillano, a graduate student taking up Masters of Science in Civil Engineering, major in Transportation from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, under the supervision of Dr. Sandy May Gaspay. Today, I will be presenting a preliminary finding from my thesis, and the presentation is entitled, "Do public transport service quality attributes contribute to people being transport-related time poor?" A preliminary finding from Zamboanga City, Philippines. Now, the study is motivated by a simple but important question. Can poor public transport service quality systematically deprive people of time? Poverty has traditionally been understood as a lack of income. However, contemporary poverty research recognizes that deprivation extends beyond income and includes dimensions such as health, education, housing, sanitation, and others. One dimension that remains overlooked is time. Unlike income, time is finite and non-renewable resource. Everyone has 24 hours in a day, but not everyone has the same degree of control over how those hours are located. Time poverty occurs when individuals have insufficient discretionary time after fulfilling necessary activities such as paid work, household responsibilities, caregiving activities, and travel. In other words, even if a person earns enough income, they may still experience deprivation if most of their time is consumed by obligations, leaving little opportunity for rest, leisure, social participation, and others. Now, because time poverty cannot be directly observed, researchers have developed different approaches to identify it. Some studies classify individuals as time poor when their working hours exceed a certain threshold. Others use discretionary time and define time poverty as having available free time below a percentage of the population median. And more recently, scholars have begun exploring context-specific approaches rather than relying on universal thresholds. This is important because experiences of time deprivation differ substantially across cities, countries, and even socioeconomic contexts. What constitutes a severe time burden in one setting may not necessarily be appropriate in another. Now, building on this literature, Transport-Related Time Poverty, or TRTP, recognizes that transportation itself can be a major source of time deprivation. The framework on the right was developed by Tiznado, Aitken, and colleagues extends traditional time poverty theory by explicitly incorporating travel time. The idea is very straightforward. When transport systems require excessive or unpredictable amounts of time, individuals lose opportunities to allocate time toward productive, social, and others. Now, TRTP therefore occurs when mobility systems impose such large temporal burdens that individuals experience reduced time availability and increased time pressure. Now, most existing studies in TRTP uses extreme commuting thresholds, typically between 60 and 90 minutes of one-way travel. However, these thresholds originate largely from global north contexts. In cities such as those in the Philippines, commuters may travel shorter distances but still experiences substantial burdens because of unreliable services and others. Now, the theoretical link between service quality and TRTP rests on the idea that time poverty emerges when people lose control over how they allocate their time. Public transport systems impose temporal costs through two primary mechanisms. First is absolute time consumption, such as long travel times, waiting times, and others. Now, the second is temporal uncertainty, such as unreliable services, inconsistent headways, and others. To cope with these conditions, commuters often depart earlier than necessary, allocate buffer time to avoid lateness, and others. Although these adjustments appear small individually, they accumulate over time. Consequently, less time remains available for work, education, etc. Now, from this perspective, TRTP is not simply a function of travel time. Rather, it is also shaped by how transport systems influence people's ability to use and manage their time. Now, despite growing discussions on time poverty, there remains limited empirical evidence regarding TRTP, particularly in cities of in the global south. Even fewer to no studies have examined the role of public transport service quality in shaping this phenomenon. Without such evidence, transport policies may continue focusing only on movement while overlooking the unequal time burdens experienced by commuters. This creates the risk that temporal inequalities remain invisible within transport planning and policy discussions. So the study, therefore, seeks to examine the existence and extent of TRTP in Zamboanga City and assess its relationship with public transport service quality. Now, the conceptual framework guiding this study is shown in your screen. The framework proposes that TRTP develops through a sequence of interconnected processes. On the left are the service quality attributes examined in this study, namely accessibility, reliability, safety and security, comfort, responsiveness, information availability, and affordability. Now, these attributes represent commuters' perceptions of the quality of public transport services. The framework then introduces an impact chain consisting of three phases. In phase one, poor service quality creates mobility constraints. Commuters spend more time traveling, waiting, etc. Consequently, less time remains available for work, education, family, etc. In phase three, the prolonged reduction in available time results in the emergence of TRTP. Now, at this stage, commuters begin experiencing subjective time pressure or the feelings of being rushed and a perceived loss of control over their daily schedules. Ultimately, these processes culminate in the outcome variable of this study, which is the TRTP. In essence, this framework treats time as a transport outcome. So when public transport performs poorly, commuters do not only lose mobility opportunities, they also lose valuable time. Now, the study was conducted in Zamboanga City, located in the southern Philippines. The city relies heavily on public and shared transport systems for daily mobility. And then public utility jeepney remain the dominant public transport mode, followed by motorcycles and walking. And then because many residents depend on public transport for work, education, and other daily activities, inefficiencies in service quality have the potential to generate substantial temporal burdens. And also, Zamboanga, on the left, recorded around 7% of poverty incidents last 2023. This makes Zamboanga City an appropriate setting for examining TRTP. Now, the data were collected through intercept surveys conducted from April 23 to 30. And then respondents were required to be at least 18 years old, residents of Zamboanga City, and a regular user of public transport. Now, after data cleaning, a total of 1,263 responses were retained for analysis. And then the study employed two analytical approaches. First, the general additive models, or GAM, were used to identify a context-specific threshold for TRTP. And then second is the structural equation modeling, or SEM, was used to evaluate the influence of service quality attributes on TRTP. Now, before presenting the threshold results, it is important to explain why this study focuses on travel delay rather than travel time. Now, most TRTP studies use longer travel duration, as I mentioned earlier, to identify temporal disadvantage. However, travel time is influenced by many factors beyond public transport performance, including residential location, destination location, urban form, and others. As a result, long travel time does not necessarily indicate poor public transport service. So this study therefore focuses on delay, which is the difference between the actual travel time and expected travel time. Unlike travel time, delay directly captures time lost because the transport system failed to perform as expected. Now, since this study examines the relationship between the service quality and the TRTP, delay provides a more direct measure of the transport related time deprivation. So the sample is composed primarily of young adults, students, and workers, and jeepneys were emerged still as the dominant mode used by respondents, while work and school-related trips represent the majority of reported travel. Now, these characteristics reflect groups that are particularly vulnerable to transport-related temporal burdens. Now, one of the key contributors of this study is the identification of the context-specific threshold for TRTP. So again, using the expected travel time, actual travel time, travel frequency, and subjective time pressure, weekly accumulated delay, it was computed and modeled using GAM. The results revealed a significant non-linear relationship between accumulated delay and subjective time pressure. This means that the effect of delay is not constant. So beyond certain levels of accumulated delay, perception of time pressure begin to increase much more rapidly. So using the derivatives of GAM curve, two thresholds were identified. The first is an early warning threshold of approximately 92 minutes of accumulated weekly delay. The second is the primary threshold of approximately 108 minutes per week. So meaning respondents exceeding this threshold were classified as experiencing TRTP. So applying the threshold identified 137 respondents, representing approximately 11% of the sample as transport-related time poor. Interestingly, sex and income alone were not statistically significant predictors. However, public transport mode was statistically significant. So this suggests that TRTP is influenced less by demographic characteristics and more by mobility conditions and mode dependence. So the findings reinforce the idea that transport systems really themselves can generate temporal disadvantage. So now in the second part, which is the analysis, examine the influence of service quality attributes on TRTP. So the preliminary findings indicate that some service quality dimensions significantly contribute to TRTP. So in particular, accessibility and affordability emerge as important factors. So these findings suggest that TRTP is not simply a consequence of travel duration. Rather, it is shaped by how commuters experience transport systems through indirect routing and even higher fare costs. Now, I also did a multi-group analysis to determine if these relationships differ across sex and income groups. So the multi-group analysis shows that the factors contributing to transport-related time poverty differ across groups. So for females, for example, accessibility and information availability were significant, whereas affordability was the key factor among males. For those without income, accessibility, responsiveness, and affordability were important, while among income earners, accessibility remained the dominant predictor. So overall, the findings suggest that TRTP is experienced differently across population and across population groups, and therefore requires targeted rather than one-size-fits-all interventions. And lastly, in arriving with intervention strategies, so far, this is what I have done. I got the estimates taken from the SEM analysis and got the absolute values of the coefficients and ranked them, the values accordingly. And not as a surprise, that two significant factors were ranked the first two, the accessibility and affordability. So to conclude, this study provides preliminary evidence that TRTP exists in Zamboanga City and is associated with public transport service quality. For cities where mobility remains heavily dependent on public and shared transport systems, improving service quality may not only improve movement, but also may return valuable time to commuters. Ultimately, inclusive mobility should not only be evaluated based on whether people can travel, but whether transport systems allow people to maintain control over their time. So thank you very much for listening. So that was my presentation.
Amazing, Junievin. Even a little bit of time left. So we can go directly to our commenter. So Samuel, you have a little bit more than 5 minutes to share your discussion of Junievin's presentation. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good to you.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. First, I want to appreciate Junievin for that wonderful and timely piece of research. The study addresses a topic that is very interesting in transport planning, but remain underexplored in literature. Of course, we look at the transport-related time poverty. So what I particularly appreciate about the work is challenge us to rethink how we define transport challenges. Traditionally, transport researchers traditionally focus on indicators such as travel time, delay, congestion, stability, or level of service. However, this study reminds us that beyond these technical indicators lies a very more fundamental questions. How much of people's lives are being consumed by the transport system? So the concept of time poverty is very relevant because once time is lost, it cannot be recovered. Another strength of this study is the theoretical foundation theory. The researchers actually connect the concept together of poverty studies with time use research and transport service quality. And I also recommend the methods, okay, combine the GAAM, the generalized additive methods, and also the SCM, the structural equation model, actually provide a robust framework for examining how different dimensions of this transport service would influence the TRTP. Now, I have few reflections. The first, the study focus primarily on public transport users. It will be interesting to know or to compare the TRTP among public transport users, like the private vehicles users, active transport users, or the multimodal travelers. So such comparison could reveal whether the TRTP is primarily a public transport issues or a broader urban mobility challenge. So why I find the study very highly valuable, I saw this threshold of approximately 108 minutes of delay per day per week. So I'm curious about the rationale behind expressing this threshold on a weekly basis. I was thinking of a daily basis, because from a policy perspective, a daily threshold may be easier to communicate and monitor. So I wonder whether presenting the covalent daily burdens might enhance its practical applicability for transport planners and decision makers. Also, the threshold was derived from travel behavior patterns in Zamboanga City. This also raised an important question about the transferability. Would the commuters in large metropolitan cities in Philippines also have the same tolerance level, Okay, or is the TRTP highly context specific and therefore requiring maybe city specific threshold? Also, I also reflect on the distinction between the service quality and traffic congestion. Now, public transport users often experience daily delay because of poor reliability, long queue times, inadequate information. However, delay can also arise from the roadway congestion, bottlenecks, or infrastructure deficiencies. So it will be interesting to understand how much of this observed time burdens is attributed to service quality itself versus the broader network condition. Also, I'm intrigued by finding that mode choice was significant, while income was not. Now, this challenges many conventional assumptions that we have about transport poverty. Suggests that the structure and the performance of transport system may be more important than income in determining whether individuals experience the time poverty. So I'll be more interested in hearing the presenter interpretation of the results and its implication for equity-focused transport policy. And finally, I believe the study opens an exciting opportunities for future research on inclusive mobility. Vulnerable groups such as women, the older adults, persons with disabilities, the informal sector workers, and often face unique mobility challenges and may experience time poverty differently, just my idea. By extending this, extend this framework would explicitly examine these groups. This work would generate more insights for designing more equitable and inclusive transport system. So let me say in conclusion, I don't know, my time is up. I believe that this study makes a very significant contribution to transport research by introducing a novel way of thinking about mobility challenges. So it reminds us that transport system should not only move people efficiently, but also protect one of the most valuable resources that people possess, that is our time. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Samuel. That was a very thorough discussion, and I feel like there's plenty that Junievin can use to make even better the writing up of these results. We have 5 minutes for open questions, question and answers, for specifically for Junievin, and if anyone wants to add on into what Samuel was discussing. We have a good time management today, so have 5 minutes extra if anyone wants to unmute themselves and have a comment, question.
That's right. That's right, Maria. I think the 5 minutes can even Junievin also can take 1 minute or so to answer the direct questions, but we'll still revisit the Q&A for general questions. Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah. So as we wait for the question, maybe Junievin can react to. I see Ariana has a hand up, but let's give Ariana a chance. Then we can give Junievin the rest of the time to just react on the quick questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Junievin. Thank you so much for this very exciting, insightful study and research you're doing. And also, I had some questions, but Samuel, or comments, but Samuel already mentioned them, so that was great. Maybe 2 things. That one was is repeating a bit what Samuel mentioned, but what is specific about Zamboanga City that you see that it makes it a unique case or actually a replicable way to study this? And then I think this is very useful for policymakers, right? When you try to improve public transport. So as part of your research, are you considering any way to approach with your results the government authorities in transport to see if this can be useful for them? Thank you.
Well, I think for the first, it is very personal. I'm living in Zamboanga City, and then my sister is currently living outside the outskirt of the main city. about 27 kilometers away from the city where she's working. So, and then Zamboanga City has very limited options in terms of public transport. And I'm imagining if one person who has limited options in terms of public transport, how much time we're deprived because of that situation. And then coming from a public transport that is not very good, very inefficient, because currently in the Philippines, we have this public modernization program, or sorry, public transport modernization program, or PTMP. And then part of it is we are going to make a localized public transport route plan, or the LPTRP. So I think this is the governing version of framework wherein all routes in our city are serviced by public transport. So I think it's very obvious that the one significant factor is accessibility, because there are indirect routes that are present in our current public transport system. So that's one. And also, when we did our the transport and traffic management plan, we also found out that most of the respondents, no, were dominated by females. So actually, I'm not yet done doing all the intersectionality part. So I'm also interested in determining what is the outcome when it comes to being a female, being a low income female, having this kind of public transport system. So that's one. And then in 2023, although Zamboanga City is already a highly urbanized cities, we experienced a 7% increase in our poverty incidence. So that's for me, it's too high. So that's why I'm going to try to check if, again, is income a part of predictor in determining if your transport system is okay or not. So I think that's all. I hope I answered the questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was great. You know, if I may add into, because we still have a little bit more time, if the audience and Obed don't have, or the other facilitators don't have any other questions, I think I'm curious about the survey that you use, so your data collection process, because I understand that is a subjective perception of time, right? And
Yes.
I really find it fascinating that you connected comfort, safety, and security to time poverty, because this is something that usually you wouldn't think of. You always think of affordability and accessibility, but you did include this other two. So I'm just curious to hear a bit more about, like, what kind of questions did you ask to kind of connect comfort, safety, and security to the control of your own time when you're accessing transport? It's fascinating.
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, for me, no, since I'm living outside the main city in Zamboanga City, I'm in part of the rural area. So the only available public transport is UV Express. I hope I don't know if you have seen. It's like a van, UV Express. But not all of those have air conditioning. So there are services that have aircon, some do not. So there are also times that the commuters choose certain mode of transport because they feel that the room is not well ventilated. So if the present or the incoming bus or jeepney or whatsoever is, for them, it's not comfortable enough for them to ride, they will choose another one. So meaning in that case, that already adds more time that will be used up for waiting, because again, you have a public transport that is not comfortable enough for them to ride. Another is in terms of safety, especially for women. There are studies here in the Philippines wherein they really have to choose the mode of transport for them to feel safe. And there are also window time wherein they have to skip riding public transport because they feel like they're not secured. So in those situations, inevitably they will increase more time that will be used up for those situations. In terms of the questions, actually there are four items for each constructs. So the questions are about overcrowding, if the room or if the public transport is well ventilated as such.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Junievin. I'll just recommend you to check on the feminist transport studies that talk about a lot about, and that will help for your intersectional analysis for sure. And I think with that, we can give the stage to Noor, which connects with this last understanding of the importance of like how different mobilities, women mobilities are. So Noor, if you want to share your screen and show us your presentation and maybe tell us a little bit about where this research is coming from and the stage of your results.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
And can you see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So yes, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Noor. I'm here to present on an idea that I have that came out of the PhD research that I did at University College London. And yeah, I want to take advantage of the fact that this is a bit of an informal space of people, you know, that are interested on this topic, just to have a discussion. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, as you can see, but it's mainly, as you can imagine, because it's just an idea, it's incomplete. So please forgive that. In terms of what I'm hoping to get out of today. So sorry, I have lost the screen in front of me. If you just give me a second. Sorry, Obed, all I can see is you. Maybe I can, instead of my presentation, is that what everyone can see? Or
we can see your presentation. We have the first slide.
Okay,
have
great.
your title.
Okay.
Are you able to move your slides?
Sorry?
Are you able to move your slides?
Yes, I am able to move my slide. Yeah, did you see that move?
Yeah, we see your cursor.
Yeah.
But the next slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so just before I get started, I just want to say, yeah, like I said, this is an idea that I have that came out of the PhD. So I'm really, really interested to hear what people's thoughts were of the idea itself, and also to learn who else in this space is working on it. You know, please do connect with me afterwards. So today I'll be talking to you about the everyday practices involved in navigating informal transport modes. And like I said, this came out of my PhD, which showed, which explored the relationship between transport accessibility and women's empowerment in Cairo, Egypt, which is where I'm originally from. I'm currently based in the UK, but I'm originally from Egypt. And the study focused, sorry, I know I'm fidgeting, but it's because the screens are a bit, still all I can see is Obed, but I'll try. So yeah, so my key findings showed that there was a very high travel demand for women. And this is obviously in line with anyone who's familiar with any gender and women's mobility studies that have done. They showed that obviously women have very high travel needs for income generation, for childcare, for household tasks. But also the study showed that there was a lot of contradictions between their freedom of mobility when it comes to obviously traveling for leisure versus traveling for household things. It also showed that women traveled a lot for income generation, which obviously contradicts some of the narratives about male breadwinners. It also showed that the women have substantial childcare burdens, and that means that they were often traveling with children, as well as having to navigate public transport modes with children, and that brought its own challenges. And then the thing that I really want to talk about today, which is that it showed that there's a very, very heavy reliance on informal modes of transport. So if you think, so this was a group of 85 women and men from 2 informal settlements in Cairo. But when looking at all the different modes that they used in their travel, 96% of them relied mostly on informal modes versus 62% who used the public modes. Or the formal public modes. There was also a very clear spatial divide for these people that live in informal settlements between the things that they did internally within their settlements and their engagement with the wider city. And there was a narrative that showed that even for people that were living inside the settlement, they used to talk about the city as a foreign place. So they would talk about inside versus outside. And even within that, there was a bit of a gender divide in terms of how household tasks were distributed and who was going outside to do what, and obviously with women coming at a disadvantage, to the extent that some of the findings showed that 29% of the women that I spoke to never left the settlement at all, while 28% of them felt like they couldn't leave alone. So if they had to do something outside of the settlement, they would usually go with their husband or another male relative. And there was a relationship between the regular engagement of women with the city. So the ones who went outside to work or for other things, they were a lot more confident in terms of their use of transport modes, and they perceived the city to be a friendlier or safer place. And so this was basically an overview of the PhD. These aren't all the findings, these are some of the findings, but basically the findings that I think are relevant to what I want to discuss today, which is, like I said, about women's use of informal modes. So in terms of the informal modes, for the people that live in informal settlements, there's a lack of formal alternatives, right? So the formal networks don't really reach the places where they live. But also within the settlements themselves, there's a lack of essential services. So if they want to access an administrative building, a hospital, or anything that is beyond, so there was no secondary schools, for example, in the informal settlements. So if you want to go to secondary school, if you want to go to university, if you wanted to go to do anything that wasn't locally available, you had to rely on leaving the settlements. There was also a lack of goods, and sellers that had goods within the settlements would take advantage of people. They would charge higher prices. So again, you had to leave and rely on transport modes to be able to access things beyond the settlement. So when it came to women's transport, they needed flexible, responsive modes, and that's why they ended up relying on informal modes. When I talk about informal modes here, I should clarify that mostly it was tuk-tuks and microbuses. Tuk-tuks mostly were used within the settlement. Sorry, I realize I probably should have put a picture in here, but hopefully some of you are familiar with what that is or what that looks like. But I can also clarify afterwards. And then there's microbuses, which are used outside of the settlement as well. But when it came to these two modes that were used so often, there was actually this massive tension between their usability and the fact that they had no other choice, right? So actually, a lot of the times these modes weren't very safe. They were quite costly. They were not always reliable. And women were constantly having to balance that to make those decisions between cost and safety and what's available and what's not available. And obviously, leading on from time poverty, also the time constraints of travel. There were a lot of positive aspects in this, and when it came to using the private modes, with the informal modes, which is that they had developed these relationships with the drivers, which meant that they, sometimes they would feel safer riding with certain drivers. They were able to negotiate some of the fares with the drivers. And they also felt a certain reassurance with the familiarity of someone local. The tuk-tuks was also often used for inner settlement movement when it came to traveling with children, for people who were elderly and weren't able to move or walk, or when it's hot, or when it's at night, or where there were people were carrying goods. They often relied on the tuk-tuks to fill that gap, that need, instead of walking. And obviously it offered them door-to-door travel, because to access any formal mode beyond, they would have to go all the way to the entrance and exit points of the settlement. So no matter what, if you're using a formal mode from the rest of Cairo, you would always have to stop at the exit and entrance point, and then your house inside could be 10 minutes walk, 20 minutes walk, whatever. Whereas the tuk-tuk would offer them the door-to-door from the entrance and exit point all the way to their house. However, the study revealed that there was a lot of cost exploitation. So sometimes women were charged extra costs to ride the tuk-tuk. The driver would tell her, if you don't want me to put strangers on with you, then you pay me extra. If you're carrying a bag on the microbus and it's taking a seat, you need to pay extra. Sometimes if the weather is really bad and a woman is walking and the driver can see that she's tired, they'll be like, they will charge more, etc. There were also certain instances where microbuses wouldn't let women on with children, or they would give them, let's say the fee is £5, and she would give them £5 and he would refuse to give her change. Sometimes some women said to me, I'd ask the driver, stop here, I need to get out. And he would say, oh, I was just stopped. Why didn't you go out 2 minutes ago when I was just there? Or it happened at certain situations where the driver would say, oh, someone hasn't paid. I'm not going to move this bus anymore unless everyone on this, unless whoever it is that hasn't paid admits. So there was all these like informal things that were happening in the journey, in the discussions with the drivers that the women were talking about. And then there was also a lot of safety concerns as well in terms of the drivers driving. So there was a lot of incidences within the settlement where the tuk-tuks were running over children. There were incidences where the microbuses were speeding or driving carelessly. So these were some of the concerns that were raised by the women. And then there was also the fact that the routes are unmapped, and it relies very heavily on a local knowledge of where the bus is going, who's going where does it stop, where does it change, where do you find which modes, especially on the way back. So it's easy if you're leaving the house and you're going to the door of the settlement to get onto the bus that's there going somewhere. But if you're in the middle of the city and you need to come back, that was more difficult. Obviously, women needed to know how much each things cost because there was no faring system. So there was a lot of learning that I could see from the women in terms of, to be able to use these systems, you need to know them. You need to know how they operate. You need to know what is the safest and cheapest. Where can you find them? How much do they cost? Where will this drop you off, etc. And then there's also a level of emotional labor in terms of peer management, in terms of fighting for your space at certain hours. You're fighting at rush hour with other passengers trying to get on. So like I said, the studies showed that for women who were less users of transport, and also who left the city, the informal settlements less, that lack of knowledge and awareness of these modes meant that they were self-excluding. So that kind of got me thinking about the different skills that are involved in this process. So if you have limited engagement with the city, then you have reduced knowledge, you have lower confidence engaging with it. You also, if you don't have the mental map of the city, then you don't know where to go. You need to learn how to navigate the modes, etc. And obviously this is happening in the context, for those of you who don't know, there's a lot of studies that show women's travel patterns, and it shows that obviously women in general outside of Cairo have complex multi-purpose travel. They have high reliance on informal modes, they have lower access to income and resources, they have high exposure to harassment, and they have less engagement with the city in general across the world. So when you consider the things that I'm mentioning today, which is the skills and knowledge that is involved, like budgeting, like trust and relationships with the drivers, like juggling time constraints, like planning your routes, safety strategies, orientation and knowing where to go, language if you're not local, or even literacy, or digital literacy and digital exclusion, or how to navigate an unmapped system, or how to negotiate fares with a man, etc. Then you start to consider what actually is the cognitive and emotional labor that happens in the travel itself. So putting this in the global picture, obviously informal modes are not just exclusive to Cairo, right? Informal modes are the modes that are used by the most marginalized communities in the world. They're the most used modes, especially low-income communities. And in almost all the global south cities, they provide a better alternative. They're the main modes to reach markets, to healthcare, to work. And especially they're more commonly used by women and more relied on by women globally. They are used as connectors to formal modes. And a lot of workers, informal workers, use them to transport goods. So what does this mean when we talk about the fact that actually their operations require a certain level of knowledge and skills that is gendered, right? So if the positive is that obviously having those relationships means that you can, oh, sorry, I skipped a page. Sorry. So there are certain characteristics that can be found all across the world, also in terms of the operations, which is that they're demand responsive and profit driven. They're flexible. In a lot of countries, you are able to negotiate the fares. In a lot of countries, the routes are unmapped. Stops are very commonly informal. It happens often that the route deviation happens mid-journey. They have practices like fill and go, which means that they don't leave at set times, and they can also stop mid-route. Some of the positives are that obviously you can form these relationships with the drivers, they can carry goods, it supports informal work. But the negatives are that obviously the male-dominated workforce, the profit orientation, the safety concerns, the fact that the operations are unreliable and that it can cost a lot, can have detrimental impacts for women. So the gap that I want to talk about today is the fact that not only do we have little understanding of formal modes and how they operate, but we also know a lot less about how women use them, what the everyday skills and negotiations that are involved in that are. What does this mean in terms of digital exclusion or literacy, such as with the community that I was working with? And what does that mean in the face of gendered power and gendered access to resources? We don't have a nuanced understanding of this. And I just wanted to say that obviously gender is not, just to explain why there's an emphasis on gender. Skills and knowledge themselves can be gendered. They're shaped by our socialization, our access to space. It affects our access to space, power, information. It affects our confidence and how we learn, and not having, and the consequences of limited skills, which could lead to exclusion, would then lead to isolation and disempowerment. And reduced travel frequency, and also heavily reliance on men. And finally, I just wanted to say that obviously talking about skills and knowledge is not new. It's not a new concept that I'm bringing today. It's the idea of looking at it in informal settlements, especially for women, that I'm trying to bring. But there's a lot of literature that looks at digital divide. There's the concept of motility, which looked at resources and appropriation of skills. There's the concept of cognitive appropriation. There's a lot of studies that have to do with gender-based violence that look at how women orient and have mental maps when it comes to travel and how that might affect their spatial knowledge. And just finally, I put this in here just to say that obviously this matters because it exposes there might be inequalities in the way that women are using modes, and that could be leading to their vulnerability. Especially in a space where we already don't know very much across the global south in terms of a mode that is very commonly used. And let me just actually finish with this one slide since I'm running out of time. And that's what I'm asking about from all of you today. It's to understand the potential for the role everyday practices involved in negotiating informal transport in the global south plays in women's transport policy. I want to understand the potential of this idea, right? Does this resonate beyond Cairo? Does anyone have any other similar findings? Do you think there's any value in looking at this further? Is there any value in looking at a comparative global south research? So I'm currently, this was my PhD research, but I'm currently an independent researcher and I'm looking to kind of expand on my findings and connect with people. Thank you. Sorry, I know I went over, so thank you very much for that and apologies.
No worries, that was worth the extra seconds. Thank you so much. This is super interesting. Unfortunately, Ariana had to leave, but there are plenty members of the informal transport or popular transport, as now it's called, and I'm sure Obed and the others and Shahan that are here will have plenty to say if on top of me. So can we please hear Tom? He said he had poor connect. It's Tom, right? Obed, am I right? I just lost my. Okay, great.
Dominic is the one going next as a discussant. Dominic, if you are just come in and give your reflections.
All right. Thank you very much, Obed. I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Clearly.
Great. So Noah, quite some great ideas you have there, right? Yeah, and I'm glad that beyond the PhD, we are also thinking how you can move these things forward, because usually we all know that after the PhD, can you hear me? After the PhD, we are encouraged to, move beyond it and also try and look further and influence policy at the end, so that at the end we can have a very just and equitable transport system. So your presentation is very relevant. Your ideas are grounded in lived experiences, right? Lived experiences, and very much aligned with current debates on mobility justice, gendered urbanism, if I may say, and when it comes to transport governance in the global south regarding informal transport. So your ideas are valid, right? You're not alone. It's very valid. Three things stand out as like a great contribution, and I would say the first one, that you treat mobility here as a lived social practice rather than a one-time movement, or rather than only movement, right? Because people need to move, especially women need to move to have access to a number of things that, makes their living very comfortable, very dignifying. So mobility is a lived social practice, and I get it from your thoughts. And also you highlight women's agency alongside or within vulnerability, right? So they are vulnerable in certain areas. However, women are able to go beyond these vulnerabilities to make their journeys work despite some of these vulnerabilities, right? And the third major contribution I would say is that you situate informal transport as both as an enabler and a constraint, right? So informal transport enables these women to move around, right? But there are constraints, issues of safety and all that. But you put all of them together and it's a great reflection and contribution, right? And I also highlight a number of things. Then I'll come in with some questions. You also ask some questions, so we'll see. You frame trade-offs. You recognize trade-offs, right? So the presentation captures the reality that women are not just making free transport choices. Instead, they are constantly balancing affordability, safety, time, and time goes back to even what Junievin came about, transport-related time poverty, all those things. Women are balancing all these things as trade-offs before they make the travel decision. And these are very notable here. And I also see your inside-outside narrative, right? Where within the settlements, women feel safer than in the wider city, right? And these perspectives are also very interesting and notable. Should I say an area that could be strengthened? I know it is already there in your framing. I would say that we can have some more theoretical anchoring for this idea. It's around mobility justice, transport justice, maybe some feminist political economy issues. So if we have some stronger theoretical anchoring, right? Scholars like Carol Martins and Karen Lucas, who's also in the UK as you are, they've done a lot of work on mobility justice, transport justice, among others. So you can look into that and have some stronger theoretical anchoring. All right. And issues of intersectionality could also be expanded. We say gender, we say women, but are we looking at what ages of women, what status, marital status, what educational levels, what religious beliefs are also shaping how these women are moving? So you can see that a young student's experience, a female young student's experience may differ from a market trader with children. So the intersectionality issues can also come in. So you asked the question, any similar findings beyond Cairo? Yes, very much. I'm in Accra, Ghana. And we also have trotros, what do you call microbuses? And your tuk-tuks here, we call them pragias. And usually these tuk-tuks or pragias here, they more like feed into the formal system, or they feed from the rural areas into the major town. So yeah, there are some similar findings here. And is there value in comparative global research program? Yes, there's a lot of value, I feel, because when you're comparing this global south research, we are challenging the northern-centric transport theory. We're bringing it to our level to see how best these issues compare within similar cities or similar areas. And we are helping to also identify shared conditions, right? Shared urban conditions. And we're also elevating the informal mobility scholarship, despite the North, global North have it in a certain way, global South have it in a certain way. There could be some some marine component where the two can come together. So overall, I feel your ideas are powerfully challenging us to rethink how inclusivity and just urban mobility should look like across cities in the Global South. Thank you.
Fantastic, Dominic. I don't know, Noor, if you rather use the time to come back to Dominic's comments or perhaps hear more from the audience, considering that you have more questions at the moment, and I think it would be valuable to hear from the others in the room. But up to you. Are you good?
Yeah, I just want to say a quick thank you to Dominic, and then I can hear the thoughts. I've written down some notes about theoretical anchoring and highlighting the intersectional comparisons more, and I'm definitely going to look at the Rena Accra comparison as well. Thank you.
Great. So I cannot hear any hand. Okay, I see one. Tanisha, if you wanna unmute yourself and come.
Hello, this is Tanisha here. This was a fascinating presentation. I really loved how you were able to also bring out the ways in which women use their agency to overcome their vulnerabilities. But since your research is from the point of view of the citizen, I was wondering if there are ways, and there are many themes here which relate to the right to the city and women using their agency to kind of reclaim public space. I was wondering if how the state feels about it, and how if the state is able to see informality, and if it is able to acknowledge the role that informal popular transport plays in it. And yeah, if you have just looked at it from other side of the lens, and yeah, and the possibilities that exist in your.
Super, thanks, Anisha. I think we can collect Shahan's comment, question, and then you can briefly come back with an answer. Shahan?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Noor, amazing work, and of course, much needed. I just wanted to share something. It's been a while since I've looked at anything from the gender lens, so I guess I'm sorry for that. But also, 7 years ago, I did for my master's thesis. I looked at characteristics of informal transit in the city of Peshawar, Pakistan, and there was a gender aspect to that, but it was perceptions between male and female along the lines of like what they prefer, the formal or the informal. But in the qualitative interviews, one thing that I did find that I just like to share, maybe it would help, is within the different sorts of informal transit modes that existed in the city, they were divided between like modes that operate within neighborhoods, modes that operate longer distance coverages, stuff like that. So there were like 4 types of informal modes. And the smallest of the unit was something that operates within a neighborhood or between neighborhoods, denser old city neighborhoods. And what we found within the difference between what the women preferred was that they preferred the smaller within neighborhood modes. And one of the reasons behind that was that the people that operated there were the people from the neighborhood, and they had some sort of a relation or an acquaintance with them. So they felt a little more safer in that aspect, but also because within the neighborhood, these were denser neighborhoods, and they were able to trip chain in smaller vehicles and do their housework or childcare or whatever they needed to do. So that's something I wanted to share. And I feel like definitely, again, you can and you should have some comparison if your time and funding allows, like try to get as much, of course, because I feel like there are a lot of things that might be common between cities, like even if geography isn't. Like, for example, me and Nisha, we've been talking about how unfortunately we can't do cross border researches between Pakistan and India because there are a lot of similarities, and from the literature that comes out, we do learn a lot. But doing something comparative, of course, would be amazing.
Thank you, Shahan. Go on. No, go Obed.
That's fine. We can give Nord just 1 or 2 minutes to come back on those comments, and then we proceed to the last presentation. No.
Yeah. So first of all, just to respond to Shahan, and then I'll answer the question as well. So in terms of obviously the study that you referred to in your work, I would be very interested. It's highly relevant, and I'd be very interested to see that if it's somewhere. Also, in terms of if my time and funding allows, at the moment there's 0 time and 0 funding, so that's kind of what I'm trying to to figure out if there is even interest. Is this idea even something real that we can work on and grow, and then we can find the time and the funding for it, hopefully. And then in terms of the question about policy implications and right to the city. So the thing about informal modes of transport, right, is that it's a challenge beyond Cairo. It's a challenge beyond this presentation. It's something that governments have been trying to figure out across the global south for a long time. There's been definitely efforts across the globe in terms of formalization, and some of these concerns could be addressed by the involvement of policy. So standardizing fares, for example, training for drivers, or some kind of control over that, their operations. So knowing who's driving, and maybe some, I don't know, some safety mechanisms that can be enforced. There's also some mapping that can be done. That means that people have greater awareness. I don't know if these general policy things that come from the government, though, would go as deep as I'm thinking in terms of the nuances of, and I don't even know if that kind of takes away a little bit from what Shahan was talking about in terms of the local relationship, in terms of, when they negotiate fares, she might end up getting a cheaper fare. Do you get what I mean? It's not just, because, so I think there is definitely, there's space for policy. But I think for me, it's also just about raising the awareness as well, and about what you were talking about, which is the right to the city and agency. Is, first of all, let's just show that women are having different experience. Their experience is gendered, and that means that they're and that is affecting them, and it's affecting their right to the city, and that there's certain experiences that are amplified by the fact that they are using informal modes of transport, etc., etc. So we're starting from even before we even get to the policy space. It's just raising awareness about the idea firstly, but then when it comes to the findings of the PhD, and not just this research, this is a small part of what was the findings of the PhD, which did show that actually there is a massive relationship between women's empowerment and transport accessibility, and how that restricted access through restricted modes, that transport-related social exclusion exists, and that it really, especially the narrative of outside versus inside, and what that means for women in terms of their ability to access the wider city, and then their opportunities to learn, right? You can't learn, unfortunately, it's a cycle. You can't learn how to navigate the city if you don't know the city, if you never go to it. It's always going to be this scary outside world, right? You can't develop literacy skills and digital skills if all the schools and everything is outside and you're excluded from getting to outside. So there is it's a self-enforcing cycle, and obviously exclusion and right to the city and ability to be able to access the city and benefit from it is a key part here.
Amazing, Nur. Thank you so much. I think that also it's so nice how they're connecting the end of the presentations with the follower presenter, because one of the things that we see is this 15-minute city, like self-enforced 15-minute city, right? Which is like these settlements that are either peripheral, but definitely lacked of the most high quality services. And people, predominantly women, end up staying with this 15-minute radio, but not necessarily from like this global north planning perspective, but more from like an impossibility of getting out for the different constraints and lack of accessibility there. So this is how am I connecting with the next presenter, who's gonna tell us about Nairobi. So John, if you wanna go on and share your screen with us, please. Great, we see it.
We can't just hear you.
We see it and we hear you loud and clear, as Obed says.
I can't hear you. John, are you able to test your mic? Maria, are you able to hear him?
I thought I was hearing him, but I realized it was you. John, can you speak? Are you trying to speak, or because we cannot hear you?
Sorry, I think.
You're good to go now.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, my name is John Omwamba. I am a researcher at the University of Ria and Trieste. We conducted in Nairobi as part of my PhD research. So my supervisors, we collaborated with Professor Karanja and Dr. Remy at the UN Habitat. And the case study is on the 15-minute city in a developing country context. So we are using Nairobi as our case study. So this study is premised on the fact that recently we have had a lot of conversation on how to make urban areas more sustainable from a planning perspective. And the 15-minute city in itself, it's based on the promise that all essential services, urban services, should be accessible within a 15-minute city walk or cycling timeline away, not distance, but timeline. And these services are our living areas, education facilities, healthcare, shopping facilities, public transport, public amenities and recreation. And from the assessments that we did before, which were published, we recorded that there is less and less evidence on how the FMC is manifested in developing countries. Even if we have growing literature or research in looking at 15-minute city cases in different contexts, most of them are in developing or developed countries, sorry. So we're basically asking how this FMC scenario is manifesting itself in a developing country context. For this study, we were looking at proximity, how close are the services to the people in Nairobi, and how is active mobility enabling access to the essential services, and how diverse are the essential services within the city, and lastly, how equally distributed are the services within the city. So we used a gradient adjusted accessibility model that we had developed in our previous case study in Italy, which incorporated equity sensitive indicators and a resident travel behavior survey to give evidence to compare between the theoretical proximity assessment and the prevailing accessibility conditions to try to see what is the difference or what is similar between the two. So Nairobi is the capital of Kenya, for those who do not know. It's what we have in the map here. It's a very quickly growing metropolis, which in the last census was recorded to have 4.4 million residents. It has a very highly socially constructing spatial structure. We have very affluent neighborhoods and very poor neighborhoods within the city. And from the last assessments that were done, walking and use of matatus or paratransit were the predominant means of transport, which you could consider to be good for a city, but we also are wary of the conditions that are bedeviling, especially the NMT route conditions. And we want to see if we want to make Nairobi more of a walking city, if, for instance, the living conditions of people improve in terms of socio-economic capabilities, will we still maintain this model share? And for our gradient adjusted model, we have a good gradient which flows from the flat terrain in the east towards the west, which is more hilly. And we believe the gradient adjusted model is going to give us a truer picture of how access is distributed within the city. And we have very high levels of emissions that are being recorded from transport. And a recent study recorded that CO2 emissions from transport go up to 73% in the city. So in terms of our methodology, we used a spatial model, which we used we divided the city into 810 grids, which we used as the origins of our, as the reference points as where people could stay in the city. And we also had different points of interest, which range from healthcare, education, retail, mobility, public amenities, and recreation. And for our mapping, we recorded access for the 5, 10, 15, and beyond 15-minute travel time thresholds. So, and our equity indices, we used a service density ratio. We used a service distribution ratio. We used a service success ratio and a mode shift access gain. So basically to see what is the difference between walking and, for instance, cycling and using an e-bike. So we shifted from, for walking, we used Rotterdam, we used Tobler hiking function. And for cycling, we used a model that was developed, we adopted a model that was developed by Rotterdam, a parking and Rotterdam, which we combined with a digital elevation model to have our access scores. And this was represented on maps, which we shall see in a short while. For our street network, we used the Google Street Network, and the points of interest, we used OSM and HDX and other sources to have a point of interest. And the elevation data was calculated using a digital elevation model to a 30-meter resolution. So we believe this model is going to be more representative and be more realistic than the flat terrain assumptions that most models use. So in terms of the results, for the first part, which is proximity of access, we adopted basically two walking access thresholds for the elderly and the slower walking population. We adopted 4.6 kilometers per hour as the walking speed. And for the faster walking part of the population, we used 5.6, which was adopted from another study that was done by Wilberg in Helsinki, which we deemed relevant to this study. For parking, we used this speed of 21.6 by parking in Rotterdam, and we adjusted for speed according to the gradient. And for the e-bikes, we adopted a study that was done by Twisk, which adopted a speed of 25.4 as the aggregate average speed for all e-bikes, because he used different e-bikes in different cycling conditions within the city and out of the city. So for the scores that we got, we found that for the slower walking population or for the elderly, public transport stops were accessible within for 59% of the population within a 15-minute walking threshold. And this could go as low as libraries at 4%. And for the faster working population, the ratio rise, the proportion rises to 52% of the city population, which goes again low to as low as 4% for libraries. So it means that in all these scores, from public transport stops, parks and open spaces, places of worship, down to theaters and cinemas and libraries, we have a decreasing level of access. And this tells us that if we use this as our threshold for assessing FMC or 15-minute city access within Nairobi, then the city is partially accessible within the 15-minute city threshold. And this is what we can see in this map. So on education, we have 31% aggregate. So education basically includes kindergartens, primary schools, and secondary schools. And if we, so the first one is for the slower working population. So if you are old in Nairobi, only 31% of you will be able to access at least one educational facility within your 15 minutes of walking. And the second part is for the faster working population, which we adopted to be below 64 years. And for cycling, it goes to 82. And for using e-bikes, it goes to 87%. The same goes with the health facilities within the city. I'll skim through this so that you can just see how it's distributed. For social amenities, we have one of the lowest scores, average scores. For food shops, it has better scores, which is up to 50% for walking and up to 95% using e-bikes. For public transport, we have a very good scores for public transport, actually, because this is the trend in almost all the studies we looked at. 59 to 65 and almost 95, 96 for cycling and e-bikes. And recreation also had 21 and 31 for walking, which is not so high. In terms of service diversity, so here we were looking at this 6 bundle of services, how many could be accessible within these grids that we created within 15 minutes. So we noted that for the slower working population, about 3.6% of the population cannot access any of the services within 15 minutes, and 1.8 for the faster working population. But with the e-bikes and cycling, it rises to 98 and 99%. And this indicates that, although it's obvious, but the evidence is suggesting that if we move to a cycling situation, then accessibility within the 15-minute framework will be improved. So on the potential to shift to cycling and e-bikes, the numbers speak for themselves. We have 59 goes up to 95, 96 for mobility or public transport stops, because here we were looking at bus stops and train stops, which are the public transport modes that are public transport modes available in Nairobi. For retail, we were looking at food and non-food shops. For health, we were looking at hospitals, clinics, and pharmacies within the city, so all forms of health facilities. And for academia, we talked about the kindergartens, primary schools, and high schools. And we had a good selection of public amenities and recreation. So the highest gains are recorded in public transport stops, meaning that if we integrate cycling and e-bikes, we could improve access to public transport stops, which could then improve reach to other areas. However, even if we introduce or improve on cycling and use of e-bikes within the city, from the model itself, it means it indicates that some services like libraries, markets, community centers, art centers, theaters, and fitness areas will still remain below the full coverage of the 15-minute city. And that indicates that we need other more sustainable modes to boost the 15 minutes city scenario of using only cycling and e-bikes and walking. In terms of equity, we looked at the log scale of the best accessed population and the 10% best forming time, because we also
You seem to be losing.
Yeah, John, I think we lost you.
We cannot hear you right now.
Now we can.
Good.
That's good.
I think the current one is giving me trouble.
We can hear you now. Perfect.
Is this okay?
Yes, you have
Good.
1.5 minutes left.
All right, thank you. Sorry.
No worries.
So yeah, I mean the last few slides. So in terms of equity access, we had Gini scores being applied to the various periods that we take for each threshold and for each service. We assessed this on the various walking speeds. So from this quadrant here, we could see how access inequality is spread from the lowest to the highest using the P90 and P10 travel time ratio. And we also had a Gini and access inequality index down here, which we could see how the services are distributed. So we could have access ratios for some of the services, like places of worship. We have public transport stops, clinics and hospitals, having very high access scores. But in terms of equity, the Gini scores were telling us that most of these services were not very well accessible. And this is documented on our paper. In terms of the travel behavior dynamics, this paratransit was the most dominant for the people that we assessed or talked to. And use of cars was at the following at 17%, walking and use of boda or motorcycles at 5.7%, and only 0.4 went to the other category, which included cycling. And for these trips were distributed according to the various destinations that we assessed. And so, for instance, schools, and we had clinics or hospitals being bicycles and e-bikes being preferred mode for clinics and hospitals. Pharmacies, we had cycling being more preferred. So generally, around 39% of our respondents, we asked them if they consider their neighborhoods to be 15 minutes neighborhoods, where we explain to them what we expect of a 15-minute neighborhood. And only 39.7% believe that their neighborhoods are 15-minute neighborhoods. But a large number, which is over 90%, would like their neighborhoods to be organized in a 15-minute framework. And in our assessment also, we found that over 60% of the respondents indicated that their routes one way were over 40 minutes of travel. So ideally, or simply put, the residents desire to have a neighborhood that is 15-minute city, 15 minutes, but what we get from the actual scores, it indicates that this is far from the truth. And in terms of the barriers, the distance is one of the barriers which makes people not walk or cycle, and safety and the state of the NMT infrastructure within the city. And they prefer to have improved infrastructure for walking and cycling, and better security to improve their preference, so that their preference for walking and cycling could be adopted. And most of these trips for schools, for clinics, for pharmacies, they are willing to be shifted to NMT if all these infrastructure changes are incorporated in the city. So there is a gap between access and the demand for safer, lower traffic neighborhoods, which in conclusion could be realized through decentralization of essential services, where possible, where these services could be reached within the 15-minute city threshold, upgrading active mobility infrastructure, and lastly, integrating paratransit and micromobility to enable the trips that cannot be totally completed by walking or cycling to be completed by public transport. Thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you, John, so much. That's a very interesting presentation as well. So now we have Tom Cartwright as a discussant. Hope the connection holds, Tom, if you want to come in for your comments.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you so much, John. And yeah, apologies if I do drop out. That was a really wonderful presentation. As a resident of Nairobi myself, I really appreciated it. I think in general, the thing that was really impressive is that's very comprehensive. You're looking at so many different types of destinations, looking at different modes across the whole city. There was a lot there. So yeah, really well done there. I would also say on a personal researcher level, having the updated modal share figures for Nairobi is very helpful. This is a problem in a lot of cities, of course, that these surveys only come out every 10 or 15 years or so, and I've gotten tired of using statistics from 2014 for Nairobi, so thank you so much for that. For the, I had a couple of questions here. So one is, you use these, the Tobler's hiking function and the Park and Rothram model, which are quite interesting. And the estimate for speed for cycling was 20 kilometers an hour, which I thought was interesting. And I wondered if that included, you said it was an average, but I kind of wonder what the sample was for that. And the reason I ask is, I cycle at around that speed, but my wife finds it irritating when I cycle at that speed. And I also wonder about older people who might cycle at a different speed. So yeah, I was wondering if there's anything there. Another one is about the use of e-bicycles. Super interesting. Those would be great to have in Nairobi. Right now, there's only 2 or 3 people providing those, and they go for about $1,000. So I wonder why to choose e-bicycles instead of like matatus, for example. Another thing that you did that I really appreciate was using the slope, considering sloping speed. As you rightly pointed out, that is not something that typically is done in accessibility studies when it really should be done, because we've all had to huff and puff our way, breathing heavily up some of these hills. So yeah, that was really great having that. Again, sort of as a resident, but I think most people would also love to see these maps put onto a base layer map showing the roads and the neighborhoods in Nairobi, right? So as it is, it's a digitalized version of Nairobi, but to see those roads and neighborhoods and to understand, okay, this is in Kilimani, this is in Eastleigh, this is in Rossland, so on. And also, I'm sure for folks from outside of Nairobi, it would help explain why the southern part of Nairobi is always blank, right? The Nairobi National Park, which is always giving everybody a headache when you have to do a map of Nairobi and you have a massive green empty space. And then on the green empty spaces, I was also wondering what data was used for that, because I was very curious that the second most common accessible type of destination in Nairobi was green spaces. I was really wondering what kind of green spaces are being included there. And I thought it was really interesting also, that you found that the 2 of the really top active mobility barriers that are mentioned are that destinations are too far or that it takes too long. And what I wondered was, whether you think there's sort of a psychological aspect here, right? Whether a walking trip that may be the same distance or possibly even the same amount of time may feel longer when the pedestrian has to wind their way through traffic because there's no sidewalk, or they have to step through broken sidewalk, or they have to get through a boda stage, or something like this, which kind of increases, I don't know, the psychological burden in a way, right, of traveling, of walking, even though the same time may be taken. And then finally, I also thought really interestingly on the slide on policy appetite, mentioned that the separated cycle lanes were the most supported for school trips, and then bus fare reduction for work trips. And I wondered if there might be something bigger there around how people think of different modes. It sounds sort of like what residents were saying was bicycles for children and buses for adults. And I don't know. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that one. But yeah, on the whole, really well done, Hongera-sana. This is looking great, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. That's very comprehensive, and I think I resonate with some of your comments as well. But I think it would be great to hear from John as a reaction to this discussion. John, if you want to come in with some reflections on what Tom said.
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to respond to a few observations from Tom. So thank you so much for your very constructive and careful observations. So for on the cycling speed, this is this study by Parkin and Rotherham was done, and it had quite a large sample of observations that were used as the reason why we adopted it for our study. For the methodology, which was to integrate the gradient of the slope. So we believed, because we did not get so many other studies on cycling that were as good as Rotherham's model. So we adopted his model. I don't remember exactly the number of observations, but I can look for the paper and share it with you if you would be interested to have a look. In terms of the cost of e-bikes, yes, we appreciate that e-bikes are quite costly. actually they might be out of reach for most people. Even in developed countries, it's a cost issue. So our thinking here is theoretically, if we think that an e-bike sharing scheme is introduced, what will be the impact or potential impact of improving mobility? And basically, these are purely theoretical numbers and not the actual numbers. So the access to public transport is included in the sense that we are assessing access to public transport stations. So we are not excluding public transport entirely, but we would also want to look at this special aspect of cycling, because e-bikes, which is part of the 15-minute city framework of assessing cycling, it doesn't mean we are only assessing the pedal bicycles only. We are also looking at e-bikes. Yeah, on the maps, yeah, that's a very good observation. We could look at how to improve the mapping to include the main public transport regulation systems and neighborhoods. Yeah, if it will make it less clustered, we could do that. In terms of the open spaces, so one of the limitations of this study is that we depended a lot on OpenStreetMap data or OSM, which is which I think should have been highlighted from the start. So we used OSM data, and then we tried to clean the data up using other technologies.
We're losing you, John, please. We're losing you. You can't hear.
Just stay closer to your mic, John. I think you were clearer when you were closer to your mic. John?
You hear me now?
Good.
Yeah. So I was talking about the empty spaces. I wanted to clarify that we used OpenStreetMap data a lot, which we believe is well representative in Nairobi. But we also cleaned it up using secondary sources of data. And for the open spaces, we were looking at all the possibly mapped open spaces within the city. So it could be the actual open spaces still available in the city. They could be public, they could be private, but we looked at any open space or green space that is recorded within Nairobi or mapped within Nairobi. In terms of the destinations, people saying that the destinations are too far. Yeah, we did not inquire further, find out how the dynamics of the destinations or getting to the destinations manifest themselves. So I might not have more information on that, but yeah, people gave us that as one of the answers during our assessment. Yeah, I think that is what I could say responding to some observations. If somebody else has any question.
That's really great, John. I have a couple of questions, but I think I shouldn't monopolize this, and Obed could also have some comments, or anyone on the public, if you want to raise your hands. We still have a good 5 minutes before we open the floor for all of the questions for all the presenters together and close this super interesting, rich session. You know, Obed, if you want to come in while we wait for anyone from the public that has questions from John, or I could also have a go.
Thanks, John, for that great presentation. I think some of the comments you've already addressed, and Tom also was able to highlight as a resident of Nairobi. I think what I got from this presentation also that is also relatable for other African cities, you may say, is the issue of data. For example, you had to, refer to somebody's work so that you use their findings or part of their data to inform your model, which at least you did a good job. I also see quite a number of cases on that. And there's something you highlighted about integration. I know Nairobi, for it to be a 15-minute city, really, you'll have to reimagine the design of the urban setup, because, as you say, you'll have to think about decentralization of services, because you find Nairobi, the CBD might be holding up most of the government services and even educational services and that. So what I think I borrowed from your presentation, and I wish I would link up with you, is how to use the open source data and the scanty available data for paratransit and micro mobility services. That's a quite interesting topic. And I think it relates to, as I finished, to Noah's, one of highlight was the availability of information about the routes, about the time schedules. Those are the concerns for the gendered perspective. Yeah, so I was just reflecting on that. Thanks so much, Maria. We can just allow people to comment and raise questions, and then we cycle back to our presenters and discuss it.
Thank you so much, Obed.
Yeah.
Great. I don't see any hands up at the moment. Please do come in. Don't be too shy. I see plenty comments in the chat of how good of our work is that John has introduced. In the meantime, while someone comes and gets the bravery to unmute themselves and ask a question, I think, John, that was super interesting. I'm just curious to know, why the 15-minute city concept? What was it that moved you towards that? I understand it's a very famous concept right now in planning environments, but I just wanted to hear a bit more about that. And I think that there's two things that would make it even better, even richer than it already is, and is kind of thinking, and it was mentioned by Tom and also kind of addressed by Obed, and is the dimension of the perceived accessibility. I understand that as it is a very theoretical understanding that you're having from this access or accessibility to different services, but perhaps the dimension of perceived accessibility and what we heard from Noor and what we heard from Junievin kind of connects with this importance of how much the perception of time, the perception of access, safety, comfort, and so on kind of enter into the game of accessibility. And same, if I'm curious if you have considered or if it's a possibility or not, or just put it out there in terms of the quality of the services, because one of the conversations that comes up quite quickly with the 15-minute cities in Global South questions, and I would say not only in Africa, but also in the context of Latin American peripheral settlements, is the quality of the services that can be accessed. And it's, you might have access to a school or to a hospital, but the hospital might not be necessarily equipped with all the necessities that are required for proper service. And finally, this dimension of temporality, right? There's this super interesting research by Shawanen and Orejuela that perhaps you've come around to it, that addresses also the fact that some services might not be open at the times where people can access them. So like the temporal dimension of accessibility that also kind of comes and problematizes the idea of the 15-minute city. I think there are still no questions from the audience. This can be for any of the presenters. If you want to kind of reflect on the previous two presentations as well, or what John was saying. Maybe Tanisha or Noor were saying if you want to address the questions about the government. We have good 5 minutes for anyone that wants to share. Jane, just so you unmute yourself. So I'm just going to stop talking and give you the word.
Okay.
Okay, great. So I'll hop in here, Maria Jose, right?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jane.
Well, thanks. This has been a very good session. I mean, time poverty, emotional labor, and mental maps, and women's constant negotiations, and getting access to possibilities, the importance of gradients, and all of the kinds of graded, really fine-grained dimensions that affect access on these presentations. There are really three really innovative and exciting perspectives on transport-related equity and transport justice. So thank you all. I've gotten several new perspectives, and I really enjoyed it. I can also mention that the interest in transport-related equity and justice and access has increased in recent years in our experience. And there is quite a lot of work out there in different dimensions. And it's not as if they're different fields, but sometimes they have similar methodologies in different ways. They draw out different patterns according to the specific field work they've done and the focus of the research. And we have at VREF have been fortunate enough to fund some of this work, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa. So, I'd urge you to, go out to our webpage and see what's there in terms of some of the projects and the project reports. And also, get in touch with some of the other researchers who were mentioned there and see if you can increase the potential for comparative work. We do have, as has come up in the chat, limited funds for travel to do comparative work at different sites. We call them for study visit grants. Right now, we're in the process of updating those guidelines, but they will be available, as I mentioned in the chat, later on. So, and these are not just for visiting other universities, actually doing comparative field work and that type of thing. So I'd just like to close by saying thank you so much to the presenters, and I thought the discussions were on point, excellent, and I really thank the whole team, especially Jose and Obed, for putting this all together. I feel really fortunate we have this wonderful network, all this talent and creativity. So certainly has been the highlight of my day. So I really thank you for all that.
Amazing. Thank you, Jane, for it's definitely one, in my perspective, it's always the last one of the best ones, right? There will come best ones. It's just, we just keep improving and making it more interesting. And definitely it was an array of methods from Noor lived realities to the model constructed by John, which gives us a completely different, much more top vision, macro vision of the city. And I think that miraculously we are finishing relatively early, just 5 minutes. So unless any of the presenters want to have some final remarks, or you want to also, anyone that wants to make their voice heard in these last couple of minutes that we have, so that we finish on time and kind of process all of the very rich findings and research that was done. Also, Shahan, I see that you unmuted yourself. In case you want to come in, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, sorry, Obed. I was gonna just remind everyone about the Graduate Academy deadline. Is that also what's your on, man?
Yeah, partly, but also if part of the participants wanted to have a last word, we could just give them 30-second speech just to say their highlights, including the discussants, and then we can finish off with one or two, reminders of the opportunities that we have, including the Graduate Academy. 30 seconds each. I know it's been a very long and short session at the same time, so I want maybe all our presenters just give us a one-word highlight from your presentation, from this session, or from your work, and also the discussions. 30 seconds each, literally. Go ahead, Noor, you can start over.
I think for me, the highlight is the amount of researchers from the Global South working on this topic and being interested in it. It's so great. It's not always, you don't always see, or maybe you couldn't see it 10 years ago when I was starting my PhD and I was looking for work. It's a lot more common now, but it's so great to see also, because like you say, there's so many similarities that we share and so many case studies that we have across the Global South that are unique to us, but also similar, that are very, very different from the Global North narrative. And it's just so exciting to see so many people from the Global South being able to come together and talk about these things from our perspective.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you. Junievin, you're able to 30 seconds? Just
Yes, I think I just want to share that the transport planning frameworks in the Philippines mostly utilize supply side metrics such as vehicle compliance, route coverage, and fare levels. And the evaluation of user experience is usually limited, and it is not known whether services delivered meet commuters' needs and how poor transport quality costs commuters' time and well-being. So no mechanism currently exists within the local franchise monitoring frameworks to determine how much of the time poverty burden is shaped by transport service gap and whose needs the system systematically fails to meet. So I think my work is still not yet finished. I have a lot of things to do pa. I'm hoping that I can graduate on time for my master's degree.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
All the best. Yeah, John, last 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. Lastly, why the 15-minute city? It's a very possible potential way through the urban planning framework that we can make our cities more sustainable, promoting less travel. And thanks a lot to VREF and the team for inviting us to this presentation and giving us this platform to showcase our research. I really appreciate it. Look forward to more engagements with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for participating. I think because of time, thank you so much to the discussant for real good engagement in this. Because John, you can just go ahead, if possible, even finish for us, because you want to finish.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I will follow Shahan in flagging upcoming conferences. The call for abstract is still open for the second African Transport Research Conference. So submit your next March 2027. Please submit your abstracts within the next 2 weeks. Thank you.
All right, and the Graduate Academy in Bangkok, also the deadline is on 15th of this month. Please, we've seen the application in our communication. Please continue sharing to our network and consider applying. Thanks a lot for everyone for joining us. I think we will end up this time.
If everybody turns on their cameras and waves, we usually like to do this with the last seconds remaining. It makes us feel that we're somehow sitting around the same table. So please come in and let us see your pleased and stimulated faces. Thanks very much, everyone.